that's all right. My name's Alex, so I'm a graduate assistant at SARC. Actually, in my last few weeks of my graduate programs, this is my last workshop ever. Yes, very excited about that. So to get started today, how are y'all doing? It's a little rainy, not the best day to be out and about on campus, but I know you still made it here, so I'm happy about that. I'm sure a lot of you are here to fulfill requirements, which I am aware of, but I still want to make it interactive, because the more interactive it is, the more you're going to get out of it. Instead of just like when you're sitting in class, if you're just listening to lecture, you don't really get as much out of it as if you're kind of like interacting a little bit more. Have any of you ever been to a SARC workshop before? Yes, a couple of you. Okay, good. So this won't be too foreign. So today we're going to be talking about final exam prep. Have any of you already started preparing for your finals? No? Yes? Okay. A couple yeses. They're coming up before you know it, about 2 weeks out, give or take, depending on when your finals are. I know some professors like to do it the last day of class, so it just depends. Hopefully you all know when your final exams are. Are any of you freshmen? Yes? Okay, so if you're a freshman, you can get link loot for attending these workshops, so I have to put the information of how to do that. So you download the Goose Chase app, and you can link the game or join the game to get your link points. Have any of you ever used any of the other resources at SARC? Anybody? No? Which ones? Okay. SI, okay. Okay, very cool. So we have a lot of different resources at SARC. It's the Student Academic Resource Center. We're in Howard Phillips Hall right now, but we're actually moving to the new Colburn Hall in the fall. But we have a lot of services that are all free to students, so these are the academic workshops. We have some one-on-one guest sessions with students as well in the ACE coaching and the learning skills consultations. So if you wanted a little more one-on-one help and to do more hands-on activities on these same types of topics, they have them on like time management, study skills, test taking, anxiety, and test prep. So if you wanted a little more help with that, you can go to our website to set those up. And then the SI, like a couple of you mentioned, and then the tutoring or small group. So you don't have to sign up in advance. You can just show up. And those for a lot of STEM classes. And then Opal, that's like an online version of SI kind of. That we only have a few classes for those. So you can check out our website for more information. Okay. So the agenda for today, so these are the main things we're going to go over. So the 5 types of studying, some different study skills and strategies, how to create a study plan, test anxiety, kind of what it is and how to deal with that, a little bit of procrastination as well, and then some other resources that might be able to help you. Okay, so where does most learning take place? Where do you think most learning takes place? Anybody? You don't have to raise your hand. Just shout it out. And I'm not afraid to call on people either. Where do you think learning takes place? Okay.
Well, okay, so there's visual learners, there's auditory learners, and there's kinesthetic learners. And so it really depends on what kind of learner you are. That if you are a visual person, then you can just sit there and read the book and you'll pick up quite a bit. If you're an auditory person, you probably need to listen to music like that. And if you're a kinesthetic person, it helps to actually be feeling with something when you learn.
Right. That is very true. So there are a lot of different learning styles, so knowing your specific learning style can help you to figure out like the best study strategies for you. Do you think you learn more, do you think you learn the most when you're in class? No? See if people are shaking your head no. That's right. It's actually not the classroom where you learn most of the material. It's outside the classroom. So that can be a variety of different things. So at home, whether you're at a desk or a table, in the library, all-night study, other campus locations, coffee shops, whatever it is that you have found is the best place for you to study. Because in the lecture, it's almost like an overview of the chapters or an overview of the material, kind of like an outline. There's not enough time in those short amounts of time throughout the week to go through all of the information. So you have to figure out how to learn that extra information outside of the classroom. a lot of times people think it looks like this. So you're laying in bed, you've got all your stuff spread out, and that's where a lot of people do their learning, which is not as helpful because that's typically what happens. You get tired, you lay down, you start to doze off. Does that look familiar for anybody? Yeah. I did a lot of that when I was a freshman, and it did not go well. So do you think it's very effective to study in your bed? Have any of you ever had successful study times in your bed? Anybody? No? It is very rare. So some people think, yeah, I'm more comfortable in my bed, so I'm going to study there. Other people think, no, I'm too comfortable there, or no, it's hard to focus. I tend to doze off. So it's actually better to study at a desk or a kitchen table. There's nothing wrong with studying at home. I actually like to study at home because it's quieter. I don't like to go to the library or all-night study because I get distracted easily. So I like to study in my room, but at my desk. As soon as you lay on the bed, you get tired, you start to slump. It's easier to get on your phone because it's just kind of the habit of what you do there. So you have to retrain your brain. Because when you get in bed, your body kind of associates that with sleep. Okay, so what is studying? Can anyone tell me what studying means to them? There's no right or wrong answer. What is studying? You.
Trying to comprehend the information rather than just memorizing it.
Okay, so trying to understand the material, what's going on. Okay. What else? What is studying? You. You. Yeah? I mean, I don't know any of your names.
Studying is, you're trying to learn a subject, so you're studying against it. You get your resources online, library, you find resources, you look at something that interests you or you're required to.
Okay, so you kind of look for outside resources. That's a good point. So a lot of people think you can only study the material that's given to you. Well, that's not true. So the way that the textbook explains it might not be the most helpful way for you to understand. You might find a video online that explains it in a lot more detail or in an easier way to understand than your textbook does. What else? What is studying? What does studying encompass? What things are considered studying? Taking notes? Okay, yeah, taking notes. So it can be in lecture and also your textbook. So a lot of ways to take notes. What were you going to say? Okay. Okay, so taking a book from the library, right. So gathering some extra resources, kind of filling in those gaps of information. So all of those things are. So this says studying is the act of texting, eating, and watching TV with an open textbook nearby. That sounds familiar, right? Do you think that's really studying? No. So you're getting distracted. You can't absorb all the information. A lot of times I'll be reading and then I'll daydream a lot. And so then I get to the end of the paragraph and I have no idea what I just read. So then I have to start over. So that kind of active listening. So that is not really studying. So these are some definitions I found. So to apply oneself to the acquisition of knowledge as by reading, investigation, and practice. To think deeply, reflect, or consider. So those are some definitions of studying. And these are all the things that studying encompasses. So it's reading, taking notes, maybe rewriting or combining notes, using mnemonics. So we'll talk about some of these strategies later in the PowerPoint. So mnemonics, mind maps, making outlines, study guides, and these don't have to be things that the professor gives you. Like we talked about, a lot of studying takes place outside of lecture, so these are things you do yourself. So creating your own outlines or study guides, doing extra practice problems. So just because they weren't assigned to you doesn't mean you can't do them. So the more practice you get and the more information you're kind of absorbing, the better you're likely to do on the test. Okay, 5 types of studying. Have any of you ever heard of different types of studying? Anybody? Yeah, a couple of you. So there are 5 different types, and we're going to go through each one and kind of see what that means. Because when people see studying, it's kind of overwhelming. It's a very broad term, and there are a lot of things that go into that. So we're going to break that down. Okay, so studying to gather information. So this is the first step. So when you go to your classes, you're gathering information. The professor's telling you what you need to know. Usually they give you PowerPoints. Sometimes they give it to you beforehand, which can be helpful for you to kind of review beforehand. Also reading your textbooks. So that's you absorbing the information. You're gathering information. Study guides that they give you, but also time. So you need time to kind of do all these things. So the next part talks about organizing and recording your information. So taking notes from your textbooks, which I know a lot of people don't do. You just read the textbook passively and think that's enough. Well, a lot of times you don't retain that. So if you're taking notes as you're reading the textbook, that gives you something to kind of go back to and kind of review so you don't have to read the whole chapter again. It's also a good way to make sure you understand the material if you're able to take notes on it and kind of write that in your own words. There are different ways to take notes. So some people prefer an outlining method, so kind of writing the heading at the top, kind of indenting a little bit, some subheadings and the information. Other people like the Cornell method. So you kind of fold the paper in half or like a third, and you write a main idea or a question on one side and write the answers and the information on the other side. I've heard a lot of students tell me that they did that in high school or had to do that in kind of lower levels, so that's something you can carry on to college. And also note cards, so you don't just have to write definitions. There are a lot of different ways to utilize note cards, so using that to kind of gather information can be helpful. Using highlighting, underlining, color coding. So if you highlight the whole page, is that really helpful? No, the whole page isn't that important. You have to be able to figure out what are those main ideas, like what are the key points. So when you're highlighting, try not to get carried away. The thing with underlining, so again, similar concept. Some people like to underline headings or underline vocabulary words so that they kind of stand out. I like to use a color code system, so for different subjects you use different colors. So whatever works for you, you've got to find out the best way to kind of organize your notes. And then make sure it's correct. So maybe you took all these notes from lecture, but maybe you were writing down stuff that wasn't as important. So maybe the professor was going off on a tangent and you were taking notes on that. So comparing your notes with your peers or other people that are in the classroom with you can be helpful to see what they thought was important. Because maybe they picked up on something that maybe you had gone to the bathroom or maybe you had dozed off for a minute. So you need that information as well. So comparing notes can be helpful, and also confirming with your professor. So maybe there was a concept you didn't really understand, or maybe you missed class that day. So going to the professor to ask questions about the material can be helpful because they're the ones with the most information. Okay, so taking notes. So taking notes are important because it helps you follow along and pay attention. So that's really important in lecture, especially these large lecture halls. It can be easy to start daydreaming, to get distracted, to start texting or playing on your laptop, especially if you're taking notes on your laptop. But taking notes helps you to focus. If you're paying attention, kind of listening to understand what the professor is saying, it's easier to not get distracted. It also helps you get a sense of what's important. So if they're talking about something in lecture and that's what the homework is on, then there's a pretty good chance that's going to be on the exam. And you need to read your textbook for more information on that topic. So typically professors, go over things that are important. Now, it doesn't mean that only what they go over is going to be on the exam. So you've got to go to your textbook for more, but typically the professor does go over a lot of important information. It helps you to remember what you heard or read. So it's impossible to remember every single thing that the professor says, especially in like an hour-and-a-half lecture. Some people even have 3-hour lectures. There's no way you can absorb all of that information at once. So writing it down the first time, that's, like we said, gathering information. It's the first time you're really hearing it, so it can help you to remember for the next time. And when you're taking notes, so it's helpful to paraphrase or to write it in your own words. So if you're writing it exactly as the professor says or exactly like the textbook says, they may not test you with that exact same verbiage. So you have to understand the concepts and be able to write it in your own words so you'll be able to recall it a lot easier. Leaving room to add later information. So if you're taking notes, skip a couple lines so that way if the professor brings it up again, you don't have it broken up into different sections. Another good way to do that is you can go back later and rewrite your notes to kind of organize them better and keep the same concepts together. Okay, I don't know if y'all can read this or not, but it talks about some different problems with lectures, because it's usually not the best way to teach. Now, it's the most cost effective. You can get all these students in one place at the same time and go over the information, but it's difficult because a lot of people have a short attention span. So if you can only pay attention for 15 to 30 minutes at a time, but you have to sit there for an hour and a half, it's really difficult for that. So the teacher is also the leader. A lot of times you don't talk at all. So you're not as engaged with the material, so you forget a lot of the information. Also, it talks about, so like the statistic is over half of the lecture is forgotten in 24 hours. So if you don't go back and review that material within a couple days, it's a lot of wasted time. The information just slips out because you're not refreshing your memory. So the way to go around this is active listening. So really understanding during the lecture, it's called listening for understanding instead of listening to respond. So the point is to help you understand it better, to be able to pay attention longer, for you to be able to recite the information later and retain it, to have notes for studying later. So you can go back in a couple days and review that information. It talks about how to do that. So before class, always preparing. So if the professor gives you the PowerPoints ahead of time, print them out. Take them with you to class. Because that way you already have what's on the PowerPoint and you can write down what they say. And you're not struggling to write down everything on the PowerPoint and they say, because there's no way to do that in such a short amount of time. Read. So reading parallel lectures and make them meaningful. So that could be like the textbook. So reading the same information that they go over in class in your textbook and kind of combining those notes. And then for the warm-up, it talks about reviewing the last lecture's notes and the readings before you go to class the next time. So if your class is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So on Tuesday night, review your textbook and lecture notes for Monday before you go to class on Wednesday to kind of give you a refresher about what we talked about last time and warm you up for the next time. Okay, studying to learn the information. So this one is most important because a lot of times people combine the first two. So they think like, oh, I went to the lecture, I learned the information, or I read the chapter, I learned it, but you didn't really. So you just gathered it. So the important part here, you have to move the information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. You have to get the information into your long-term memory so that you can recall it when an exam question comes up or an essay question. So ways to do this are combine the lecture and textbook notes. So if you take them separately, you can make a third set of notes that combines those and the similar concepts. And repeatedly recite the material. So like it talks about on the slide before, so every couple days, like reviewing the information again. We'll talk about memorization versus understanding in a couple minutes. So then you have to sort out like the information you have learned and the information you've not learned yet. So ways to do that are practice problems. So a lot of people get to a hard question and they skip it. Been working on it for a while and they skip it. Well, those hard questions are the same ones that are going to trip you up on exams. So don't skip it. Look for those other resources we talked about, whether it's the YouTube videos, looking at the textbook, asking one of your classmates or your friends to help you. So with the practice problems, you can figure out which ones are easier for you and which ones that are not. Asking your professor or classmates questions, go into professors' office hours. So even if you can't make the office hours on their syllabus, email them and ask them if they can meet with you. So getting creative with those tough concepts. So we'll talk about those in a minute, but creating like visuals or mnemonics to go along with your material, because the more things that you do to it and the more ways you can kind of interact with and give you different things to look at on the same topic, the more likely you're going to remember it. Because reading the same thing over and over, it's not as helpful as doing some of these other strategies. And then don't procrastinate. It talks about creating a study plan about 2 weeks out before your exam. If you start studying for the exam about 10 minutes before, not helpful. Even 2 days before isn't as helpful because it's a lot better if you study for 30 minutes at a time for like 10 sessions than if you study like one time for 5 hours. So if you break them up in smaller pieces over longer periods of time, it's a lot more likely that you'll absorb that information. Then it talks about defining your priorities, so kind of remembering your goals of why do I need to do well on this test? Why do I need to do well this semester? Why do I need to do well in this class? So kind of breaking your goals down for the right now and translating those to the future can help. Okay, Can anyone tell me the difference in memorizing and understanding? There are a lot of differences. Yeah.
So memorizing, you know, the little definition after
Mhm.
the whole thing,
Mhm.
textbook, but understanding you can apply that definition to solve a different problem and something like that.
Right. So that memorizing might help you to answer that specific concept or that specific question, but if it was applied to something else and asked in a different way, you probably wouldn't be able to answer the question correctly. So this one kind of goes back and forth. So it talks about memorizing. It's trying to learn the ideas and concepts word for word. So you're trying to memorize exactly like it is. That's not as helpful as being able to convert the ideas and concepts into your own words. So that way, if the professor does word it differently on the exam, you'll still be able to understand the concept of both. It's not that you learned it verbatim and that's the only way you're going to remember it. That's also helpful when they flip it. So if you learned like the word and the definition, but then they give you the definition and you're like, oh, that's backwards, I don't remember. I learned it like this way. So they flip it sometimes. If you're memorizing something, it can be difficult to explain to others. Whereas if you're understanding it, it's a lot easier to understand, a lot easier to explain to others. For example, if your roommate is not in the same class as you and you want to know if you understand something, try to explain the concept to them because they have no idea what you're talking about. So if they can understand it because you explained it to them, then you know that you have a pretty good understanding of it. If you're unable to see the relevance outside the classroom, then you're probably just memorizing it. That happens a lot for math classes, I know, and maybe some other ones. So if you can figure out how this could apply in any other situation, then you probably understand it. If you're just like hitting a wall, be like, this isn't helpful, this is dumb, I don't know why we have to do this, try to understand it a little more and see if you can apply it to a situation in real life where it might be applicable again. Has anyone ever heard of Bloom's taxonomy? A couple. So this concept came up because the lower you are in school, so for elementary school, middle school, even high school, you're kind of at the bottom of the pyramid. So it's a lot of remembering, some understanding. They want you to recall exact facts and definitions. We have like spelling tests, vocabulary tests. You're tested over the exact material that they give you. Give you a study guide, and everything they put on it is on the exam. They tell you what you need to learn. But as you get older and get into higher course levels, it kind of goes up. So for a lot of group projects or a lot of like practice problems or projects you have to do, you have to be able to apply the information or analyze it. So drawing connections among different ideas, evaluate the material. So the papers where you have to like compare and contrast, things like that. It's evaluating. And then creating. So a lot of times you have to create new material or create projects or like do hands-on activities. So those kind of go up the pyramid, and those are a lot more difficult to do if you don't have this like basic understanding. So you have to be able to understand the concepts before you can create new concepts. So I think this is helpful in figuring out like what you have to do first. Okay, studying to check for learning. So has anyone ever self-tested themselves before an exam? So created your own practice test, done extra practice problems that were not assigned to you? Don't see a lot of head nods. No. So that is a disadvantage to yourself because just because the professor doesn't give you an outline or doesn't give you a study guide, you can create your own. So this can be really helpful if you have someone else in the class with you. So you could each create a practice test and then switch. So that can help, especially if you know the test format. So a lot of times professors won't tell you like this will be on the exam, but they'll tell you it was multiple choice or it's essay questions or true false. So knowing what types of questions there are can be helpful because that's what you should include in your practice test. So I said swapping practice tests with a peer. If there's a study guide, you can use those to make practice questions. Using flashcards, so sort them in different piles. These are the ones I got right on the first try. These are the ones that did not. And like I talked about a little earlier, trying to teach the material to someone else. So if you have a friend in your class, that's great. But if not, try to teach it to someone who has no idea because they will be able to ask you questions about what they don't understand. Then that will test to see if you understand. So then it talks about how to figure out if you actually know it. So Check for accuracy and completion. So make sure that all the answers you got are correct. So maybe if you misspelled something or if you left out one of the steps on a real exam, the professor's going to count off for that. You're going to miss points if you missed a step or if you put positive instead of negative or something like that. So make sure that you got it exactly correct. Don't let yourself slide. So again, we talked about those hard questions. A lot of times we skip those or, oh, that's really difficult. That won't be on the exam. Well, those are typically the questions that are on the exam, and that they will count off several points. So get it right when you're practicing so that you can get it right on the real exam. For a lot of classes, there are review sessions, or if there are not, you could go to office hours for the class. So ask your professor specific questions. So if you're going to the office hour and saying, hey, I'd like to know what's on the exam, or hey, like I need to help studying for the exam, probably not going to help you. But if you go with a specific question, say, hey, I've been working on this problem, and I know this, this, and this, but I don't know how to do this part, or I understand these concepts in history, but I don't really understand what this is talking about. So if you ask specific questions, they're a lot more likely to help you and give you that information that you need. Okay, so creating your own questions. So using main ideas and headings. Can anyone give me an example of how you can do that? So professor doesn't give you any practice problems. They give you a study guide with a list of concepts. How can you use that to create your own questions? Make note cards. Okay, what would you put on the note card? Okay. Okay. Yep, note cards can be really helpful. You can do definitions and even formulas and things like that can be helpful. What else? How could you use a main ideas? How can you turn a statement into a question? Anybody? What words do questions start with? What? Exactly, I just used it. So what? So if you put what before any of the statements, it typically turns into a question. So what is the definition of? Like he said, what are the steps in? See if you can list those. Compare and contrast, and then put two concepts. So using like these simple formulas, that's ways you can take the material and turn them into practice problems. It doesn't have to be the exact, I actually think that's the next one. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be the exact question that's going to be on the exam. That's not what you need. You just need to make sure that you're comfortable with the material and using it in different ways and comfortable understanding and reciting that information. So that can be helpful. Studying to refresh. So now that you have gathered the material, you've learned it, so now it's important to refresh your memory because you don't want to forget it. So revisit learned material. So a lot of times people take notes, if you take notes in class, then you get to the exam and that's only the second time you've ever looked at those notes. Well, that's not as helpful. So studying them every few days can be a lot more helpful. So we talked about studying, like reviewing the notes before you go to class the next day, reviewing your notes over the weekend from the week. I know a lot of people don't want to do schoolwork on Saturday and Sunday, but if you just take a little time out of the day, it makes a huge difference in the long run. So review your notes from earlier chapters. So you can study alone or in groups, so whichever one you prefer. Personally, I prefer to study alone. I get distracted easily. I talk too much in groups. But other people really enjoy working in groups because they can bounce ideas off each other, answer each other's questions. It just depends. So then creating visuals and memory devices with your material, which we will get to in just a minute. So the different ways that you can manipulate your material, the more likely you are to remember it. Okay, and then number 5 takes place after you take the exam. So studying to improve your learning for next time. So doing a post-test survey. So what that is when your professor gives your exams back, if they give them back. You can usually go to their office hours if they don't give them back so that you can review the exams. But figuring out what types of questions you got right and what types of questions you got wrong. Maybe the true-false questions really stumped you and you missed the majority of those. So it sounds like next time you need to do more practice with the true-false questions. Maybe it was the essay questions, so you didn't practice writing an essay. Maybe it was grammar problems that you got counted off for. So practicing more grammar next time. So whatever it is that you mostly got incorrect, you will know next time you need more work on that. Recall your thoughts during a test. So when you leave a test, think about which concepts got you stuck. Which ones gave you the most problem? Did you feel confident or did you not when you were in the exam? And then you can figure out which learning skills worked for you and which ones did not work, so the next time you can use more or less of those. Also utilizing the resources that maybe you didn't do before, so using the different ones we talked about at SARC. Also the Writing Center can be really helpful, or the Math Lab or MAL. Also your TA or instructor, because they are the ones that create the exam. Okay, so now we talked about all the different types of studying. So now we have to talk about when you're going to study. So a lot of time people say, I don't have time to study. So my supervisor actually made a worksheet that kind of breaks down the hours in a day. So you can plug in your own, but we did a sample one. So if you're in 12 hours of class a week, and you're sleeping for 8 hours a night, which I know most people do not, and you're taking 3 hours a day per eat, 1 hour for each meal, then you will still have 79 hours left. So if you're working 20 hours a week, and then you have 25 hours to socialize, relax, watch TV, whatever, that still leaves 34 hours remaining for studying. Now, is anyone in this room studying for 30 hours a week? Anybody? No? Me either. Okay, I'm in graduate school and I don't study for 30 hours a week. But it shows you that there is time in the week. You just have to plan more effectively, really figure out what it is you have going on to figure out when you can study. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on time management, but I think it is important in developing a study plan and being able to study for your exams, because I can teach you all these great study strategies, but if you don't have the time to implement it or the foundational time management strategies, you're never going to start. So assess your current use of time. So figure out, how much time am I spending a day watching TV? How much time am I spending at the gym? How much time am I spending doing this? Whatever it is. Create a routine or a schedule. So if you're doing the same things but at the same time every week, that can be helpful to get you in the routine. So if you go to the gym the same time every day, or you play video games every day, or you go to sleep at the same time every day, your body starts to recognize that and responds accordingly. Tracking assignments and deadlines, so keeping track of when things are due and how much time you have to do them. Breaking down the assignments in smaller sections, so we will talk about that again. Planning ahead, so figuring out what you have due through the rest of the semester, because there are only 2 or 3 weeks left. That can be important. Using reminders, so the reminders app on my phone, I use it every day. It's so helpful. I would forget so many things if I didn't. But you can use the calendar as well. And then reassess the use of your time. Maybe every week, maybe every 2 weeks, see if things have changed or you need to make some adjustments. So this talks about how to spread out your schedule. So avoid taking on too much. It's okay to say no if you don't have time to do something, you don't have time to pick up another shift. Maybe you need the money, but you know you really have to study for an exam tomorrow. You have to weigh those pros and cons. So being cautious of your work hours. So if you go straight to work from class and you don't get off work till 10, when you get out of work, you're ready to go to bed, or you just want to sit down and watch TV. Like, the last thing you want to do is homework. So if you've scheduled your homework time from 10 to 12, that's unrealistic. You're not going to be very awake or very alert during that time. So you got to figure out another plan. And to be realistic about the time allotted. So if you give yourself an hour to write a 5-page paper, is that realistic? No. Usually takes me like a little time over several days to write a paper. So being aware of that and breaking them up in smaller sections. So tell yourself, okay, I'm going to do this amount on this day, this amount on this day, because if you only give yourself an hour to do all of these assignments, you're going to get overwhelmed. So it talks about staying on track. So keeping track of your due dates and assignments is helpful. Using a planner, a calendar, web courses, a phone. Does anyone not use anything to track their assignments? They just keep it up here? So I do a lot of one-on-one sessions with students, and a lot of people tell me, oh, I don't need a planner. I don't need a calendar. I just remember. Is that any of you? Okay. Because it's not realistic. That's how things slip through the cracks. So I meet on one-on-one with students. They tell me they're fine, and then I pull up their web courses. See, 0, 0, 20. Oh, well, I didn't have time to finish that assignment. Okay, well, that's the point. You have to give yourself enough time to complete the assignments. So the point of the time management strategies is to make time your partner, not your opponent. So you can make it work for you, not against you. Because planning takes a little bit of time, but in the long run, things will run a lot more smoothly. Okay, so breaking down assignments. So what happens when you see study written down in your plan or your phone? So you get after this workshop, you're flipping through and you're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to study today. Then what? Well, what are you supposed to study? It doesn't tell you what you're supposed to study, doesn't tell you when, doesn't say, like, specify what you're going to do when you're studying. So a lot of people don't do it. They're like, oh, I don't need to study, I'll do it tomorrow. They put it off because they don't realize, like, what it entails. So if you're a bit more specific and you said, you know, I have to read chapter 3 and answer the study guide questions on this date from 4 to 6 p.m. Okay, so that is a lot more specific. So then you would say, okay, I need to read chapter 3 because I have class tomorrow. Like, that's the point that I'm doing. That's the reason I'm doing it. Rewrite and combine lecture and textbook notes from this week from 2 to 4 p.m. So those are a lot more specific, and it's a lot harder for you to push it off if you know exactly what you're supposed to do. Like, giving yourself these deadlines can be really helpful. Okay, so to make sure you all can see this, so I created like a sample study plan for like a given week. So I started it on a Wednesday, which would be tomorrow. So obviously you would input your own classes and your assignments, but it just shows you this is an easy way to break down your assignments. So one day you might print your articles for your English paper on campus, okay? And then you're not going to start writing the paper until Friday. But on Friday you're going to spend, I think I just said start at 1 p.m., but you have to write at least 2 pages. So at least 2 pages of content. And then if you have any questions, email your professor. English comes up again on Sunday, so you work on your paper again from 7 to 9 p.m. for at least 2 pages. So if you get done with 2 pages in less than that time, that's great. But just kind of give yourself those specific deadlines, because you might write 2 paragraphs and you're like, nah, I don't want to do this anymore. And then you start doing something else. But if you give yourself these specific deadlines and guidelines, it can be harder to push it off on the next day because you see you already have other stuff to do the next day. So for biology, it says you would read chapter 10 and take notes from 2 to 4. So for a lot of times I give a 2-hour window because doing it in 1 hour is usually not enough time. Sometimes it might take you longer than 2 hours. If you are not someone who can sit there and read for 2 hours straight, then take breaks. So maybe you read for 30 minutes, take a 10-minute break. Read for 30 minutes, take a 10-minute break. It's okay to take breaks. You just have to have the self-discipline to get back and do it again. Instead of watching video games, playing on your phone, it is very easy to get distracted. So for biology, you would come back to it again the next day because you would combine your lecture and textbook notes from 5 to 6. Again, so on Saturday, you would create some mnemonics and visuals for your exam from 2 to 3:30. And then you would create or read the next chapter and take notes, and then complete the study guide for the exam. So it's within this 3-hour window. Again, there's some more on here that talk about going to SI, going to tutoring, doing your homework problems for Intro to C. So again, the point is to be really specific and to put in what you're going to do for all of your classes. Because if you schedule for one class, like, that's great, but then what about the other 3 or 4? Then they kind of fall to the wayside when you have an exam coming up. But you still, at the same time, need to keep on track with all of these different subjects. Okay, so now to the actual study skills. So there's a variety of different things that you can use, but these are some ones that I think are most helpful. So the main one is just being actively engaged in your material. So like I said, you know, when you're reading the textbook, you get distracted. You you can't pay attention for that long. You zone out, you daydream. So doing things with the material, looking at the pictures, thinking about ways to apply the material in real life. Mnemonics are really helpful, so we'll go over those on the next page. So mind maps and thought maps are similar. This is an example of a mind map, and it's kind of a breakdown of how to do it. So it talks about like thinking fast, so it's just doing it like quick hand. You don't have to make it neat. The goal is you can use different colors. You're just trying to write things down and connect different concepts. You can use that from history to science to computers, like whatever the subject is, there are ways to kind of connect the material. And drawing out pictures, whatever it is. Okay, does anyone know what mnemonics are before I go into the examples? No, I've said it a couple times at this point. Anybody? Okay, so mnemonics are memory devices. So you've probably heard of several of these, you just didn't know they were called mnemonics. So acronyms are a mnemonic. So it can be phrases for PEMDAS. What does PEMDAS stand for? So the order of operations, it's PEMDAS. Also, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So it's phrases that can help you remember things in order. Roy G. Biv, does anyone know what that is? The rainbow, colors of the rainbow. So they're in the color order. So let's use names or images. So this one uses a bat. So the phrase is, a bat took depressants. The depressants are barbiturates, alcohol, and tranquilizers. So for a science or a psychology class, that might be a phrase that you came up with. So using like different acronyms, you can use like your own material and come up with it yourself. It can be silly, something that makes you laugh, but just something that is memorable to you, because it doesn't matter if it makes sense to anyone else. It only has to make sense to you. Another type of mnemonic is a music mnemonic. So the ABC song, that's a mnemonic. Multiplication tables. So when I was in elementary school, my teacher had these records of multiplication tables, and they were songs. I still play the songs in my head when I do multiplication tables. Schoolhouse Rock. So a lot of people watched those videos as a kid. They had a lot of songs that helped you learn material. That was usually history. So I actually looked up, I put this website on there before I looked it up, but it was not as helpful. But there was another one to kind of help you come up with music mnemonics, and it was, I think it was just Mnemonic Generator. So the vocabulary was neat, but you had to, like, you could sign up for a trial and you had to pay for it. But the Mnemonic Generator can help you come up with your own mnemonics for your different material. Okay, so drawing connections between the material. So I thought this one was neat. So H, the letter H, has a horizontal line in it. The V points down and vertical lines go up and down. So that can just little ways that you can help connect the concepts and remember those connections and definitions. Spelling. So if you were trying to remember, you know, which type of principal it was, so they came up with these phrases. So principal is your pal at school. Principles is the rules you follow. So the ending is spelled differently, and they have different meanings. So the similar endings there. And then rhymes. So 30 days, half September, April, June, and November. So that's a rhyme to help you remember which days of the month have, or which months of the year have 30 and 31 days. So different things like this. So these are all different types of mnemonics. Those are just some examples. On our website, there are 9 different kinds. I just pulled the ones that I think are most helpful. But you can go on there and you can Google it, Google mnemonics, and you'll come up with a lot of different ones. Maybe if it's for a specific subject, so maybe you're looking for biology mnemonics or chemistry mnemonics. Google that, and I bet you'll find a ton that other people have already made, and use those to your benefit. Okay, so mind maps. So mind maps have the thing in the center, so this one is about how to study. But you can put whatever subject it is you're working on, and then just start like drawing it out. So to study, you need to plan, you need to take notes, you need to organize for your exams. And then it breaks down what you need to do for each one. So to organize, you need time. You have to figure out what the tasks are, the thoughts. They also draw like pictures, so it doesn't have to be beautiful, and it doesn't have to make sense to anyone else but you. So using different colors, different shapes, like whatever. So this can be really helpful. So this is helpful like at the second or third stage of learning. So after you've already gone to class, you've already gotten the information, do different things with the material. So thought maps are a little different. It breaks it down into some different shapes that can be helpful for different ways of learning. So for classifying information, it's kind of like a list method in the trees. The bubble map, that's similar to the mind map, so that can be helpful for describing different things. The bracing, the flow maps for sequences, so whatever it is you're trying to understand. A lot of times you'll see things in the textbooks that are drawn out, like the graphs and charts. There'll be different things like this, so you just have to find which one is most useful for you and plug in your information. Okay, so you've got all these study strategies, you know what you need to do, so what happens? You get very busy doing the things that you do want to do in order to not do the things that you are supposed to be doing. So this happens to me a lot. My favorite time to clean is when I should be studying. So you find all these other things, like, oh, I need to do this, or oh, I need to do this, but you should be studying. So I did one of the workshops I did this semester was on procrastination, and there are so many different memes out there. I literally could have done the whole one in memes, but these were some of my favorites. So I just prefer doing all my work in a deadline-induced panic. I'm not a procrastinator. That sounds accurate. A lot of times people are like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. So that's what mystical land where 99% of productivity, motivation, and achievement is stored. Like, oh, I want to do it tomorrow. You don't just find motivation. Like it's more of self-discipline. You're never going to want to do the work unless it's something you're really interested in. This one talks about shows different things that you get caught up doing when you're procrastinating and some different stages that happen. But that's what really gets in the way. So a lot of distractions, so you have to eliminate these distractions so you can study. So they have like locks. Google Chrome has an add-on where you can lock yourself out of certain apps for a certain amount of time. You can turn your phone on silent or do not disturb, things like that. But another difficult thing when it comes to studying is concentrating. So maybe you have all the material in front of you, you think you're ready, but you can't focus. So the first part happens, you have to intend to study for a set amount of time. So that's what I kind of talked about in the study plan and the time management. So setting out, okay, I'm going to read this textbook for an hour, and then I can take a break. So you have it in your mind that that is your goal. So having your materials ready. So if you sit down to study and you're on campus and you realize you left your laptop charger at home or you don't have a pen with you, that's not as helpful. How are you going to study without a pen? So making sure you have all your materials with you. Studying in a quiet place, and preferably the same place if possible, can be the most helpful. Vary the study activities. So we've talked about a variety of different things you can do with the material. But if you're just reading over the same thing over and over, you get bored, you get distracted. So taking breaks. So it's important to take breaks. Your mind can't absorb 3 hours worth of information at once. So take a break. Have a worry sheet. So this helps me a lot. So if you're reading and something keeps popping up in your head, so if you remember, oh, I need to get something at the grocery store, just write it down on like a Post-it note or a piece of paper. So that way you've written it down and you don't keep thinking about it and you're not going to forget. So have like a running list so you don't get distracted there. Okay, so maybe your issue with test taking, it's not the studying. Maybe you think you have great study skills and you spend a lot of time doing it. Maybe it's test taking anxiety that gets you caught up. So some anxiety is normal and helpful. So if you didn't feel any anxiety or any stress about doing schoolwork, you wouldn't do it. So anxiety can prevent you from procrastinating, kind of gives you that push and that motivation to do your work. But too much anxiety causes problems. That can cause you to have racing thoughts. It can cause you to start shaking. You get hot and you can't focus. So it's all about finding the right balance. So a lot of times test anxiety comes from lack of preparation or a lack of understanding the material. So there is a difference in knowing you know the material and thinking you know the material. So if you've done all the strategies we talked about, you've done the practice tests, and you haven't missed a single question, chances are you're going to do pretty well. So know that you know the material. So if it's doesn't just come up during a test. So if you have anxiety for other situations, so constant worry, you feel overwhelmed, you're really stressed out, talk to someone. So CAPS is on campus, it's free service, so you can go talk to a counselor there. They can teach you a lot of different coping skills, so deep breathing, there's guided imagery, some grounding techniques to kind of get you out of your head and focused in the present. So you can learn all these different strategies that can help you, not just in an exam, but in other times. But also some people do need medication. So it may be a chemical imbalance that is causing the anxiety. So don't be afraid to ask for help if that is what you need. These are some other tips for decreasing anxiety. So deep breathing can really help. There's an app that has a lot of the strategies that I just talked about. It's called Pacifica, and it is free. I think it's really helpful. But it can walk you through some deep breathing. So listening to music before exams. So listen to a song that makes you really happy or gets you in a great mood. Some people say like slow, like peaceful music, but maybe that's not for you. Like maybe you want to get pumped up and get excited. So you want to go into the exam with confidence. Thinking positive thoughts. So if you go into an exam thinking, oh, I'm going to fail, like this is awful, I'm going to fail this class, your mind starts spiraling, you're not going to do as well. You're not going to be able to focus. So thinking positive thoughts. Some people put like a motivational quote on the background on their phone, write one on the front of their notebook or on the first page, write it on a sticky note, whatever it is that helps you going or helps keep you going. So arriving to your exam early can be helpful. So if you are rushing to get to class, or you're late for work, or you're late for class, and then there's a wreck and you're more frazzled, you're going to be anxious when you get there. So try to arrive to class early with all of your things, and maybe talk to someone on your way. So on your walk to class, like call a friend or a family member. Maybe talk to someone in line at Starbucks or the cafe, just to kind of keep your mind distracted. It's not necessarily to be distracted, but you don't want to keep like stressing about the exam. You've done all you can do at this point, so if you've studied enough, then try to not stress about it. So it talks about how if you fill your mind with positive things, it can be really powerful. Some other tips for exam day. Okay, so going with your first instinct. So a lot of times people start to second guess themselves if they didn't adequately prepare, or maybe they did prepare but two questions or two answers sound really similar. So go with your first instinct unless later in the exam you find definite information that you need to change it. Answer questions worth the most amount of points first if you're able to. So if one question is worth 30 points and all the others are worth 2, you should probably start with that 30-point question. If it's a really difficult one and you can't figure it out, then skip it. So you don't want to get too stressed and overwhelmed with the difficult ones that you miss all of the easy ones or don't get to those. So then you can kind of switch gears there. So staying focused. So trying not to catastrophize or spiral into all the things that are going to happen if you don't do well on this exam, or all the things you have to do after class that day. Try to focus on what's in front of you. So again, that deep breathing can help. And taking your time. If you have 2 hours to take the exam, you can take the full 2 hours if you need to. It's not a race. So the first person that finishes an exam is not necessarily the one that does the best. So if you need an hour and a half, then take the time. Then it talks about, one of the last few slides is to develop a UCF support team to help you. So this semester, you can still reach out to some of these, but definitely in the beginning of the semesters. So as it starts, talking to your professors or your advisor, career services and CAPS, UCF Cares, which is kind of an umbrella resource. So if you're not really sure who can help you on campus, go to UCF Cares and they can help you. It's kind of like a referral service. Our website at SARC Online. So I don't have time for the study skills video, but it's kind of like an overview of some of the things we talked about. But that is our website, and I'll see if it will pull up in just a second. There's a lot of worksheets. Also, Study Union is coming up. So it is April 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. So the SARC hosts Study Union every semester for all of the classes that we have SI and tutoring for. So their finals review sessions during those 3 days. It's mostly STEM classes, but the schedule is up, so you can go to our website and you can find the finals review sessions there. And that is it. So my information is on the left. If you have a worksheet that you need me to sign, please go ahead and fill in my information and then I will sign it. I have some stuff for y'all too. So one is a survey and the other is a sample study plan on one side, and the other is how to effectively review notes for a test. So it's kind of like an overview of a lot of the material I went over. And if you have any questions, just let me know.